everybody, welcome back to the Collector's Vault. My name is Mike. I recently did a video about the hypothetical new Metroid game that I would love to see, Metroid 5, the sequel to Metroid Fusion. And with the potential of Metroid Prime 4, being possibly released later this year or next year, and just the rumors of all these Super Metroid remakes or potentially other just Metroid games in general, I think it'd be kind of cool to look back on basically a game that a lot of people try to forget ever existed. It's a game that people think is probably Samus's lowest point, and that is Metroid Other M. It's a very divisive game. A lot of people have their opinions on it. A lot of mixed reviews. A lot of people think this could have been the game that should have killed Metroid. People tend to think of this as the Sonic 06 of the Metroid franchise. I personally do think it was one of the lower points of the series, but it was definitely not because it was a bad game. I think this is a game that just didn't live up to hype that we were all getting when we first saw those first trailers and first teasers. They really did look impressive, and I just don't think that this game really, it just didn't meet our expectations. But that does not mean I think this is a bad game. And I think it'd be kind of fun to go into detail of what I think about this game, as a whole. So, without further ado, this is my review of Metroid Other M. So, Metroid Other M, one of the most controversial games on the Nintendo Wii. It's bad enough that Metroid went through its second dark age after this game's release, but unlike the first drought after Super Metroid, which is considered to be, even to this day, one of the greatest games ever created, Metroid Other M left many fans disappointed, divided, and in many cases downright angry. After the success of Retro Studios' Metroid Prime trilogy, which spanned over the course of the Nintendo GameCube and the early Wii years, many Metroid fans wanted more, myself included. Metroid Prime 1 left such a huge impression on the gaming industry by redoing what Super Metroid did back in 1994. It was a title that redefined the whole genre of gaming, a first-person shooter adventure game that follows the Metroidvania style of exploration and growth. Although Prime 2 Echoes and Prime 3 Corruption did not sell as well as their predecessor, they are still considered to be masterpieces among the Metroid fandom. And then we come to 2009. At Nintendo's E3 conference, we were introduced to the trailer for Nintendo's new chapter in the Metroid universe, a project with developers from Nintendo and Team Ninja. Needless to say, the hype train was firing on all cylinders. We were getting a new style of gameplay for Metroid, a third-person shooter action game that appeared to focus on the 2D action from the classic games, but in the third dimension. Not only that, but it incorporates the first-person aspects from the Prime series. The game seriously looked like it could have been the best Metroid game yet, but we were wrong. So wrong. The game is still, to this day, considered to be the worst game in the series. That's a very strong statement to be given to a video game that has a very dedicated fanbase. I mean, look, even Samus herself is questioning why she's still around. This game is sometimes wished to have never existed, but that's why I'm here to say that the game is not as bad as many people say. Now, this is obviously subjective. If you don't like a game, you have every right to have your own opinion. I want to go into detail and explain why there is a lot to love about this game. This does not mean that the game is perfect, it's far from it. The flaws of this game are glaring and should not be ignored. So I think the best way to explain this is by making a list of pros and cons of Metroid Other M. However, unlike most pros and con lists, everything in this is going to be considered to be a pro and sometimes a con. Every time the game seems to do something right, it does something wrong at the exact same time. I think it's time I explain. Without further ado, let's get started. Subject number 1, the presentation. Pros: the graphics, the casting and the audio. The cons: the graphics, the casting, and the audio. Metroid Other M was created by Nintendo and Team Ninja, which had access to amazing studios that could produce incredible visuals. I mean, just look at some of these cinematics. Yeah, they're pre-rendered, sure, but these are still breathtaking. Even in-game and during the scripted cutscenes, the graphics are some of the nicest to ever grace the Wii. In fact, most of the areas in this game look really good, and considering that the Wii's resolution was only about 480p, they probably looked really sharp considering that the game was kind of blurry. They are comparable to Brawl's graphics, which can look really sharp on HD TVs, almost like too sharp in their jaggedy, but they are stunning on a standard monitor. Not only that, but we can finally hear Samus speak, and not just in grunts and agonizing woes from the Prime series when she was getting attacked or killed.
Anthony.
Now we have Samus being voiced by Jessica Martin. Although it can be argued that a silent protagonist makes a character like Samus more valiant and heroic, I think it's great to have Samus interact with other characters. Technically we had this back in Prime 3, but Samus still didn't have any real dialogue with other characters. We are also introduced to new characters that have a history with Samus, like Anthony Higgs, and the return/introduction of Adam Malkovich. But don't worry, he will get his own section in this video. Now on the con side. These graphics are great for the Nintendo Wii, and are close to comparable to Xbox 360 and PS3 standards in some cases. But there are multiple occasions where the graphics are just very inconsistent. Samus's model, as well as the other GF Soldier models, are nicely detailed, and many environments are lush with great textures. But then we just get awful examples of monsters that look like they belong on the Nintendo 64. Like, what is this thing? It's supposed to be a cocoon for these flying monsters, but it looks like a gyrating bowl of something. It looks like the black goop that took you to the one level in Super Mario 64. And this lava pit monster, like, I just don't understand how these creatures' designs could look like this, while some of the other creatures look amazing. Even the environments have moments where they just look like they don't belong on the Nintendo Wii. And this inconsistency is very jarring. Now, we have to talk about the voice acting. Yes, I thought it was interesting to give Samus a voice for the very first time, but the voice acting is just horrific for Samus.
I awoke to the familiar voice of a quarantine officer. A dream. I had been reliving the tragic moments of my recent past.
I will defend Jessica Martin, as it's not her fault that the acting is bad. It's how she was directed by Yoshio Sakamoto. This is just bad localization, as he directed her to make Samus appear stoic. But in the Western world, she just sounds like a robot. It's basically a clash of cultures.
I'm not a member of the Galactic Federation. I came here because I intercepted the distress call. I'm a bounty hunter. And I know that something is after you. Please, you must believe me.
Yeah, no thanks. I've seen Terminator.
And the rest of the voice acting can either range from acceptable
He looks like a pile of rags.
to just plain awful.
Come on, Samus. Let's go next door.
I didn't even mention the music and the prose, and that's because there are only a handful of good tracks from the game's soundtrack. Personally, I only really like the Ridley boss battle theme, which is a really good composition of the classic Ridley theme, and the biological experiment floor theme, mainly because it's really chilling and freaky, but fits well in their room with the dark and disturbing environment. The rest of the original soundtrack is mainly atmospheric and ambient tracks, which are great in their own way, but Metroid is known for the mixture of chilling tunes as well as upbeat melodies that make you pumped to go on an adventure throughout the alien world. The worlds of the Prime series seriously spoiled us with such great songs for many areas of the planets that Samus explored. Subject number 2, the gameplay. Pros, the gameplay itself, progression, and linearity. The cons, the gameplay itself, the progression, and the linearity. For the first Metroid game to incorporate a third-person perspective, it felt really cool to explore this hostile environment watching Samus from afar, just like in the 2D games. The gameplay is fast and snappy, and Samus can move pretty quickly through the space station. There are plenty of monsters to blast apart with your cannon, and lots of enemies that will definitely take some time to bring down. There are also a hefty amount of bosses ranging from a mini-boss style to the larger main bosses. Now, while all the other Metroid games have Samus explore an alien world and locate upgrades to strengthen herself, Other M has Samus equipped with almost every upgrade she had in Super Metroid, minus the X-Ray Visor. She won't be allowed to use these upgrades until Adam authorizes their use while she's on this mission. Again, don't worry, we'll talk more about that later. Anyway, this was a new way to progress in the Metroid series, as you simply gain the new ability when you come across an obstacle. I wasn't the biggest fan of this, and I still am not to this day, but moving on. Finally, let's talk about linearity. Just like Metroid Fusion, Other M is one of the most, if not the most, linear games in the franchise. You are always told where to go, and backtracking is almost non-existent until the very end of the game. Because of the use of locked doors everywhere you go, it's very hard to get lost in this game, since you can't really go exploring or go off the beaten path. You go into a room, you defeat the threat or solve the puzzle, and then you move on. This style can be good for newcomers to the series if they find the non-linear progression kind of intimidating. However, exploration is supposed to be the best part of Metroid. It basically is what defines the Metroidvania genre that the series started. Without exploration, you basically are just playing Contra or Mega Man.
Now, Metroid Fusion was also a very linear game, but at least it did have elements of exploration.
You can still backtrack, and the game may have used locked doors seldomly, but when you were given a destination, you were not told how to get there, so you still had to find your alternate path when needed. Other M, however, has no exploration, as rooms only ever have an entrance and an exit, except for a few exceptions. The rare moments when you have to solve a puzzle or figure out how to get from here to there really is just platforming in many cases, or even just very few puzzle solving. As far as upgrade progression, what is a Metroid game that doesn't have you defeat enemies and obtain a new power? Or raid the space pirate base and steal a weapon? What is a game that just has you come to a locked door and then the key just appears in your hand? You know, metaphorically speaking, of course. Well, you get Other M. And it's just not Metroid-y. The reason for this style of progression is because this game has Samus following Adam's orders, and Adam feels that Samus working alongside his soldiers while fully equipped with all of her upgrades will be dangerous, and she could cause a lot of collateral damage not only to the space station but to just people in general, especially when they were trying to find survivors on the ship. And while this does sound reasonable, this doesn't explain why Samus is not authorized to have access to her non-weapon based upgrades. Primarily her space jump and the grapple beam, which could help her explore the space station, and the Various suit and the gravity suit, which help protect Samus from the dangerous environments. And I know I'm not the first person to mention this, but it is atrociously glaring when you have Samus navigate through Section 3, which is the volcanic section that has the high temperature rooms that we have seen many times in the Metroid series. However, as you would expect, the moment you walk through these volcanic areas, Samus takes damage, and you have to carefully tread through these areas and get to a room with normal temperatures. So why does it take Adam forever to authorize the use of the Various suit? He basically waits until Samus is about to die from heat exhaustion, and that's only if you make it to a particular part of the story when you're about to fight this abomination of a boss design. Clearly Adam is able to see what Samus sees, and he knows when she is in danger. Hence the whole upgrade authorization. He sees that there is an obstacle and he says, alright, you are now authorized to use this upgrade. So why does he allow Samus to enter the heated areas and simply just stand there and cook herself without saying anything? One of the best parts of this game's narrative is when Samus is following the rogue soldier called the Deleter, and she activates her space jump and screw attack without Adam's authorization. As great as this scene is, this is only one of the 5 times in the game that Samus gets an upgrade without authorization. The other 4 being when Samus actually locates a new upgrade, like the diffusion beam, Samus earning the secret missile from this boss, Samus activating her gravity suit so she doesn't get sucked into outer space, and Samus using the power bomb to defeat the Metroid Queen. Or, you know, suffer a horrible death. So I'm not a big fan of the upgrade system. Lastly, regarding the gameplay, although it's definitely fun, it has its flaws. The main issue is the controls. Unlike many Wii titles that offer multiple controller options, you can only control Samus using the Wii remote. And no, you can't use the nunchuck. So you are moving Samus around a 3D world with only a D-pad. You will get used to it, but the fact that Sakamoto wanted to simplify the controls to be similar to that of the NES controller, which, you know, the Wii remote is slightly designed after, is still no excuse for a poor control scheme. In order to enter the first person mode, which was mentioned earlier, you have to point the Wii remote to the screen. In this mode you can't move because you don't have any more buttons or nor a directional pad to use, and this is the only way for you to use your missiles, your super missiles, the grapple beam, and the scan visor. And don't get me started on the scan visor. This game came after Prime 2 and Prime 3, which perfected the scan visor by highlighting scannable objects. But this game doesn't have that, and it expects you to find the object you need to scan in order to progress in the story. Which in many cases you're just flailing the pointer around, sometimes looking to lock onto something arbitrary. Whether that be a random point in a dark room, green blood that is camouflaged on the green grass, or the final boss. Ultimately, the controls are very flawed and can greatly hinder your enjoyment of this game. And subject number 3, the plot. Pros: the setting, the story, and the characters. The cons, and you guessed it, the setting, the story, and those characters. Let's start with the setting. Metroid games tend to be on an alien planet, full of lush environments, exotic creatures, big and small, and teeming with secrets that are hidden throughout a nexus of tunnels that Samus will need to explore. Other M setting, the bottle ship, is heavily inspired by Metroid Fusion's BSL station. There is no space pirate base, but the technology aesthetic is here with the man-made hallways and labs, and the lounge areas for the workers to relax. This can give us a great sense of eeriness because we are venturing through areas that are normally full of humans, yet are now barren and quiet. They give off the impression that you are now exploring a ghost town, or maybe even a graveyard. But you also have your natural environments in the animal containment sections. Just like in Fusion, Other M's ship is divided among 3 sectors. One of a vibrant jungle, one of a frozen wasteland, and one of a volcanic lake and a barren desert. Although this is only half of the areas that Fusion had, most Metroid games only have about 3 main areas to explore, not counting the hub world or the starting area. So it's not as if Other M is lacking in environments and worlds. Story-wise, this takes place directly after Super Metroid. From the gorgeous cinematic at the beginning of the game, we see Samus defeating Mother Brain after the death of the baby Metroid. Samus returns to the Galactic Federation HQ to inform others of her successful mission on Zebes, the destruction of Mother Brain, and the elimination of the Zebesian space pirates. Samus then picks up a distress signal from a research facility and finds herself assisting a group of GF soldiers who also received the distress call. And who is in charge of them? Why, it's none other than Adam Malkovich. This gives us, the players, a great opportunity to see how Adam interacts with Samus, before he died and became a computer. We might even see, which we do, how Adam dies, or if he does live to fight it another day, and this could possibly lead to another game before Metroid Fusion, but that doesn't happen. We don't just get introduced to Adam in this game, we also meet Anthony Higgs. Anthony Higgs, right? You do know Anthony Higgs, right? Oh, you don't? Huh. Well, maybe we'll learn more about him in this game, because he is an old friend of Samus, apparently a war buddy when she served under Adam's command. And although we do get the names of the other soldiers thrown at us quickly before you go on your actual Metroid adventure, we will get chances to engage with them in future cutscenes, as limited as they are. We also eventually do find survivors on the bottle ship, one of which is Madeline Bergman, the young woman in charge of the whole operation. The other is, Madeline Bergman? Oh, I see. We learn that the blonde Madeline Bergman imposter is actually a cyborg, one created by the scientists on this ship to act as a mother brain-like computer to control all the experimental creatures and bioweapons here on the ship. We also learn that the ship hosts a secret Metroid breeding program, one which Melissa Bergman, or MB, can control. And when MB went rogue after the Galactic Federation felt that she was too dangerous and too powerful, she took revenge on the Galactic Federation and the battleship scientists by having all the bioweapons go berserk and kill all the researchers. The real Madeline Bergman is the only survivor on the battleship. Phew, that is a lot of info being dropped on us. This is definitely the first big Metroid game to have major story elements and a narrative. But despite all of this, it's time to talk about how poor it all really is. Alright, let's get through this quickly. Number 1, the setting is basically a ripoff of Fusion's BSL station. Although the battleship was supposedly inspired by the BSL station, it didn't incorporate the amazing atmosphere that the 2002 Game Boy Advance game did. The environments are similar as they are all natural worlds that are contained on a man-made ship, but the BSL station embraced its artificiality. Many rooms resemble research labs that just have their theme or the aesthetic taking over, with vines growing in and out of the walls, or caverns carved out and cut from the ground and placed inside metal tanks, or the water area basically just being a giant fish tank. The bottle ship has brief moments of this, but then it's all taken away when we see these hologram projectors. Like, yeah, they're cool, but something about that just takes away from the atmosphere. And then there are times where the bottle ship just goes a little too far. They don't just have caverns of rock sitting inside metal walls. They have an actual volcano kept inside what must be a gargantuan room. Like, you don't think of it because you sometimes forget that you're on a ship and you're not in an actual planet's core, which I'm sure is intentional, and I really appreciate that part of the design when you're playing the game. But come on, there is a volcano on a spaceship. Like, it clearly has to be powered by the ship to operate and to, you know, artificially erupt and spew lava and the cinders out. But why do they actually have on a research ship a giant volcano? Why did you put a volcano in here? Like, I mean, I guess it's very possible to keep molten lava in pools, like, held by actual rock, which are then kept inside metal containers, and maybe with, like, you know, an HVAC system to help ventilate. I'm thinking too much into this. The point is, why not just make the rooms resemble a volcanic area with lava for the lava-dwelling creatures to live in? I'm sure I'm thinking way too deep into this, but it just bothers me. The real point is, I feel that it's wrong that they went with the man-made ship idea again. For a game that precedes the game that first used the man-made ship idea, I touched on this briefly in my Metroid 5 video, and it really drives that point home. Let's not forget that they're doing the whole secret Metroid breeding program concept again, in the game that precedes the game that first introduced it. I know a lot of people give Star Wars The Force Awakens a lot of crap because it has so many parallels to A New Hope, but those movies also had a lot of differing factors. Other M is just too similar to Metroid Fusion. And again, this is the game directly before Fusion, so at least Force Awakens happens like 30 years after A New Hope, and there are other movies in between, so these parallels are somewhat like refreshing and nostalgic. But Other M is just playing it way too safe by copying Metroid Fusion. And that includes the story too. We have a clone Ridley instead of a real Ridley. We have a secret Metroid breeding program. We have Adam Malkovich. And the only thing that is truly different is that Other M has more characters that are basically pointless, but regardless. And it has a different final enemy, thank God. At least a rebuilt cyborg version of Mother Brain is much different than an alien doppelganger of Samus. Oh wait. But then I could make the argument that this game takes place directly after Super Metroid, and we are once again having Mother Brain as the final boss, if you can even call this a boss fight. And let me just get this out of the way now that I mentioned Ridley earlier. Yes, the whole Samus getting PTSD is ridiculous, and I agree that if this was the first time that Samus faced Ridley since she was a child, then this kind of reaction would be perfectly acceptable. Like, I get that they were trying to show us of just how truly terrified of Ridley Samus is, and I can understand that each time she faces Ridley, she gets these moments of fear, remembering that this is the monster that destroyed her home, killed her parents, or even just the fact that she is facing Ridley again. I'll admit that I would be concerned if the villain I killed 5 times keeps coming back to life one way or another, but the PTSD scene is the real issue here. I just don't know how the developers wanted us to react when we saw that scene. And let's not forget the questionable method of Adam shooting Samus in the back with an ice beam, which somehow completely disables her suit and cripples her. Instead of telling her to get away from the Metroid so he can kill it, he just shoots her in the back, and then kills the Metroid. And then he will then proceed to tell her that she can't destroy these Metroids because these are immune to ice. And then the dialogue between Samus and Adam. Look, I understand that Samus has feelings for Adam as a respectful leader and a father figure, even though she had 3 dads already. And Adam does care for Samus, yet we are given the impression that he is cold and heartless and only cares about following orders and would even sacrifice his own brother for the greater good of the people. I get it. And this scene was to show us Adam truly would take his own life to save Samus. Just like how he would let his brother die to save countless people, Adam knows that if Samus goes into Sector 0, she would die. So instead of 2 people having to be killed, he will take the role of destroying Sector 0 and the Metroids, so Samus can live and face against Ridley. But it is poorly executed, and it's because I'm still questioning why Adam shot Samus. I am still questioning how he knows about the Metroids and how they are not able to be frozen, and I'm also questioning how he knows that Sector 0 can only be launched from someone inside the sector itself. I can keep going on, but I'm tired of complaining. After all that I have said, I want it to be known that I still think this is a good game as a whole. There are many flaws that cannot be ignored, but this game is often considered to be one of the worst games of all time, which is ridiculous. Have you even played some of these games? These are the definition of garbage. However, I have played this game more times than I have played Metroid 2 Return to Samus. And this is not because I think that game is worse. I think Other M is more replayable. There are a lot of aspects of that game that I find fun and enjoyable. Yes, the controls are terrible, but the gameplay has its moments. Yes, the story is terrible, but hey, at least they're trying something new by implementing a story with dialogue. I believe that the developers had a great idea when they had this game on paper, but clearly through the development process they tried too many gimmicks and didn't focus on localization as well as they should have, and probably rushed the game for all we know. But this game isn't a compilation of glitches and game-breaking instances or dull gameplay for the most part. It's just a game that didn't live up to the expectations that we had for it. And that's okay. Games are allowed to be imperfect. So I can confidently say that Other M is not anywhere near the worst game of all time. It is not even a bad game in its own right. It is just a bad Metroid game that tried to be innovative and flew a little too close to the sun in some cases. Many still think that the third-person style that they attempted should be thrown in the fire because of how poorly this game reviewed, but I personally see a lot of potential in returning to this playstyle. I can only hope that Nintendo allows the team assisting with the development and production of the next Metroid game to put their heart and soul into it and not be hindered by limitations. Just like how Retro Studios is putting their blood and sweat into Metroid Prime 4, just like they did with the original trilogy. I give Metroid Other M 3 out of 5 stars. It is definitely not a game you should play to get into the Metroid series, but it is a game that Metroid fans should experience at least once, just for some quick fun and to see Metroid when it was at one of its lowest points. This can help a fan really appreciate the high points in Samus's adventures, and can help us wish and imagine for a better third-person style Metroid game to grace us in the future.
Hey guys, this is Mike from the Collector's Vault. I really hope you guys are enjoying these kinds of videos, the longer ones with all the editing. To me, they're a lot of fun, but I don't get a lot of spare time to work on these because I'm usually working a lot or spending time with my fiance. If I hate being one of those guys, but if you like this kind of content, please let me know. You can, click the link in the description below to go to my Patreon to support me and let me know that you like this kind of content. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm trying to be as active as possible on there. And definitely, please check back on the channel for more videos about collectibles and definitely some more videos about Metroid in the future. So I think that's it for now, guys. Take it easy.